When we think of relationships, we often imagine growth, connection, and stability. But in a relationship marked by narcissism, the rhythm is very different. It doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in cycles, almost like the seasons. Spring is where it begins. Everything feels new, intoxicating, and full of promise. You are admired, cherished, and perhaps even placed on a pedestal. It feels like a rare bloom after a long winter. But in this springtime, the growth is not genuine. It is conditional and based on what you can provide to the other person. Then comes summer, warm, bright, and passionate. This is the period where intensity is at its peak. You may feel as though you have found something extraordinary, yet beneath the warmth, there is a subtle unease. The heat of summer can scorch. You start noticing small cracks, criticism, impatience, and shifting moods. As the cycle continues, autumn arrives. This is the season of change and decline, where once there was admiration, now there is questioning, dismissiveness, or even contempt. You may feel yourself falling, like leaves stripped from a tree. Confusion grows. What happened to the warmth of before? You begin to question yourself more than the relationship. Finally, there is winter, a cold and barren season. This is when emotional withdrawal or outright abandonment takes place. Silence, distance, or rejection leave you feeling exposed, lonely, and disoriented. The winter can be brutal, yet it carries clarity. Nothing grows in this climate. And just like the natural seasons, this cycle often repeats. Spring may return in the form of apologies, promises, or rekindling gestures, but the pattern resumes and the seasons turn again. Understanding this cycle is not just about recognizing someone else's behavior. It's about reclaiming your own power. Once you see the seasons for what they are, you can stop blaming yourself for the changes in weather. Instead, you begin to prepare, protect, and eventually step out of the cycle altogether. Because unlike nature's seasons, you do not have to keep circling back. You can choose a different climate, one where growth is steady, where warmth is real, and where the seasons of your life are not dictated by someone else's storm. The idea of the cycle of seasons in a narcissistic relationship can help us understand why these relationships often feel so confusing, intoxicating, and destabilizing all at once. Unlike healthy relationships, which grow in a relatively steady way and are built on consistency, a narcissistic relationship moves through predictable but turbulent stages, very much like the seasons in nature. Each stage has its own mood, its own atmosphere, and its own lessons, but when you're in it, it can feel like you are caught in weather you cannot control. The first phase is like spring. This is when everything feels new, vibrant, and alive. A partner who operates from narcissism often begins with a showering of attention and admiration. This can feel incredibly affirming, as if you have been discovered or finally seen for who you are. There may be constant texts, compliments, gestures of affection, and the sense that the relationship is extraordinary, almost faded. Just like spring, it's a season of blossoms and fresh air, and it often awakens hope in someone who may have longed for a deep connection. But what makes the spring deceptive is that it is not based on authenticity or mutuality. Instead, it is about what you represent to the other person, an image, a supply of validation, or the fulfillment of their needs. The warmth of spring feels real, but it is conditional and fragile. As time passes, the relationship moves into summer. This is the season of intensity, heat, and high energy. It can feel like passion is at its peak, and it may look, from the outside, like the relationship is thriving. This is often when people describe being swept away, caught up in a whirlwind that feels larger than life. Yet, summer also has its storms. The warmth can suddenly feel scorching. Small criticisms, unpredictable moods, or subtle control start to emerge. The same intensity that once felt exciting begins to feel consuming, even overwhelming. The summer of the narcissistic relationship is marked by inconsistency. Bright, beautiful days followed by sudden thunderstorms. You may find yourself working harder to maintain harmony, dismissing your discomfort, or holding on to the memory of spring to justify the present heat. After the long days of summer comes autumn. Autumn is the season of decline, the period when what once felt vibrant begins to wither. The admiration turns into criticism, the attention into neglect, and the affection into impatience or irritation. This is when the partner's mask slips more noticeably and what you receive feels colder, harsher, and less dependable. You may find yourself confused, wondering what you did wrong, why the person who once adored you now seems dismissive, or why the joy has been replaced by distance. Autumn is a season of loss, and in a narcissistic relationship, it is often the moment when self-doubt takes root. Instead of questioning the dynamics, you may question yourself, am I not enough? Did I cause this change? The falling leaves are not just the fading of love, but also the erosion of your own confidence. Finally comes winter. Winter is the coldest and harshest season of this cycle. In winter, there is emotional withdrawal, silence, rejection, or sometimes complete abandonment. The warmth that once drew you in is gone, replaced by distance or even cruelty. Winter can feel barren and lonely, a time when you feel exposed and unprotected. This is often when people in narcissistic relationships experience their greatest pain, because the contrast to the earlier seasons is so stark. The very person who once felt like the center of your world now feels unreachable or even hostile. Yet, winter also brings clarity. Just as nature strips the landscape bare, this season can strip away illusions. It reveals the truth that the warmth you felt in earlier stages was conditional, not sustainable. But the cycle does not end there. Often, just when the cold becomes unbearable, the narcissistic partner will attempt to restart the seasons. A small gesture of affection, an apology, or a promise of change can bring back a false spring. And so the cycle begins again, leaving you trapped in a loop of hope and disappointment. Understanding this cycle is crucial. Recognizing that these seasons are not random but patterned helps to explain why you may feel both cherished and discarded within the same relationship. It is not a reflection of your worth, but of the dynamic itself. Just as no one controls the weather outside, you cannot control the shifts in these relational seasons. But you can learn to recognize them for what they are, and that awareness gives you the power to step out of the cycle. Unlike nature's seasons, you are not bound to return to spring after every winter. You have the choice to seek steadier climates where growth is real, warmth is consistent, and love is not conditional on how well you play your role. When we speak of emotional weather in a narcissistic relationship, it is an apt metaphor because the emotional tone shifts like climates you cannot predict, and you often find yourself trying to dress for one kind of weather while suddenly being thrown into another. Just as a day may begin with sunshine and end with a storm, the emotions in these relationships are inconsistent, extreme, and often disorienting. What makes this so painful is not simply the variety of moods, but the lack of stability. You never truly know what to expect, and the constant unpredictability keeps you on edge, always adjusting, always questioning, never at ease. In the beginning, the emotional weather feels like a warm, sunny day in early spring. You are bathed in admiration, kindness, and attentiveness. This warmth is not subtle. It often feels like an outpouring, a dazzling light that makes you feel alive and special. It is intoxicating precisely because it is so rare and so intense. You feel safe, wanted, and prioritized. This stage of emotional weather can set the stage for deep attachment because it creates the illusion that you have found an emotional home that is safe and nurturing. But much like spring sunshine that appears after a long, dark winter, it creates dependence. You start to long for that warmth whenever it is absent. As the relationship progresses, the weather shifts into something akin to summer. Summer is still warm, but the heat is intense, sometimes oppressive. In emotional terms, this is where passion and intensity peak, but it is also where storms begin to break through. Sudden bursts of criticism, irritability, or moodiness can feel like a thunderstorm erupting out of nowhere. One moment you are basking in affection, and the next, you feel scorched by sharp words, dismissive gestures, or cutting remarks. The unpredictability of this climate makes you hypervigilant. You begin to scan the skies for signs of a storm, watching their tone, their expressions, their silences, hoping to prepare yourself for what might come. It is exhausting, like living under a sky that could crack open at any moment. As the cycle continues, the emotional weather cools, and you find yourself in a kind of autumn climate. Here the warmth is fading, and the storms are less fiery but more chilling. The emotional atmosphere becomes one of distance, coolness, and quiet withdrawal. Where you once felt noticed, now you feel invisible. The dismissiveness, the lack of empathy, and the subtle disdain settle in like fog. This fog of autumn is confusing because it lacks the intensity of earlier storms, but it drains you slowly. You begin to doubt your perception. Are you imagining the coldness? Are you too sensitive? The emotional weather of autumn is marked by uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, self-doubt grows. Then winter arrives. Winter in a narcissistic relationship is emotionally barren. It is silence, rejection, or even cruelty. It is the withdrawal of warmth altogether. You may feel abandoned even when the person is physically present because emotionally the connection is frozen. Winter is harsh because it strips you of the comfort of illusion. In the earlier seasons, at least there were flashes of warmth or storms that broke with apologies. In winter, there is nothing to hold on to. The coldness is stark and the loneliness profound. This is often the time when the partner experiencing the narcissistic dynamic feels most destabilized, questioning their worth, replaying every detail, and aching for even the smallest sign of spring to return. And yet, as is common in these cycles, winter does not last forever. Just when you are numb with the cold, a thaw may appear, an apology, a smile, a small gesture that recalls the warmth of spring. This is not a true change in climate, but a calculated shift, pulling you back into hope and restarting the cycle of emotional weather. The unpredictability keeps you hooked because you remember the sunshine and believe it could return if only you could weather the storm a little longer. This constant change in emotional climate destabilizes you. Human beings thrive in environments of consistency and predictability. When the emotional weather is steady, trust and safety grow. But in a narcissistic relationship, the unpredictability erodes your sense of stability. You may find yourself second, guessing your needs, silencing your voice, and trying to anticipate what version of the person will show up. Over time, this wears down self-esteem and creates a cycle of dependency because the very instability of the weather makes you cling more tightly to the hope of calm. Understanding the metaphor of emotional weather helps bring clarity to why these relationships feel so confusing. It is not that you are weak or that your needs are unreasonable. It is that you are being asked to adapt to climates that are constantly shifting, and no one can thrive when one day they are in the warmth of spring, the next in the fire of summer, then in the fog of autumn, and finally in the freezing cold of winter. The instability is the point. It keeps you off balance, keeps you trying harder, and keeps you tied to a cycle that does not allow you to feel safe. Once you recognize that this weather is not your fault, you can stop trying to predict it or change it, and instead choose to step out of it altogether. Unlike the weather outside, you do have a choice about whether to remain in this climate. The impact on the self in a narcissistic relationship is profound because it is not just about what is happening between two people, but what it slowly does to the way you see yourself, trust yourself, and relate to your own identity. At the beginning, the attention and admiration you receive can feel validating. You are seen, celebrated, and even idealized. This feels empowering at first, almost as if you are finally being recognized for your worth. But the problem is that the recognition is conditional, not grounded in who you truly are, but in how well you fit the other person's needs, image, or agenda. The moment those conditions change, so does the treatment. Over time, this destabilizes the very foundation of your self-concept. As the relationship unfolds, the constant shifts in behavior from the narcissistic partner create confusion. One moment you are cherished, and the next you are criticized or dismissed. This kind of inconsistency makes you begin to doubt your own perceptions. You may ask yourself, did I misinterpret what happened? Am I being too sensitive? Should I try harder? The more you question yourself, the less you trust your instincts. Slowly, the ability to rely on your inner compass erodes. The result is a disconnection from your intuition and a growing dependence on the other person's version of reality. This dynamic also chips away at self-esteem. When affection and validation are given only sporadically or withheld without explanation, you start to believe that you must not be worthy of love unless you earn it in very specific ways. You may find yourself walking on eggshells, carefully curating your words and actions to avoid conflict or rejection. Your energy shifts from being authentic to being strategic. Instead of showing up as yourself, you are performing a role in hopes of gaining approval. Over time, this can make you feel as though your true self is not acceptable or lovable, and that only the version of you that meets the other person's demands is worthy of attention. Another painful impact is the erosion of memory and clarity. Narcissistic dynamics often involve subtle gaslighting, statements or actions that deny your experience or make you doubt what you saw, heard, or felt. For example, if you bring up an inconsistency or express hurt, you might be told that you are imagining things, overreacting, or being unreasonable. Repeated often enough, this makes you mistrust your own mind. You begin to rewrite your memories in line with what the other person insists is true, even when it contradicts your lived experience. This kind of psychological erosion is deeply damaging because it undermines your confidence not just in the relationship, but in your ability to perceive reality accurately. The impact extends into your sense of safety and belonging. Healthy relationships provide a secure base, a place where you can be vulnerable, make mistakes, and still feel valued. In a narcissistic relationship, vulnerability often feels dangerous because what you share can later be used against you or dismissed. Instead of comfort, you experience exposure. Over time, this makes you more guarded, yet paradoxically more desperate for the rare moments of closeness that do come. The bond begins to feel like a gamble, sometimes rewarding, often punishing, and never predictable. This constant up and down leaves you depleted. You may notice increased anxiety, feelings of inadequacy, or even shame. The shame often comes from internalizing the message that if the relationship is not working, it must be your fault. This internalization is one of the most damaging impacts on the self because it turns external mistreatment into self-blame. Instead of recognizing the cycle for what it is, you may begin to think, if only I were better, calmer, more patient, more loving, then things would improve. This mindset keeps you tethered to the cycle while deepening the cracks in your self-worth. Another subtle but significant impact is isolation. The more consumed you become by the relationship, the less energy you have for your own interests, friendships, and growth. Sometimes, the narcissistic partner may directly discourage your independence, but often it happens indirectly. You are simply so emotionally preoccupied with the highs and lows of the relationship that little else fits into your life. This isolation further disconnects you from external sources of validation, making you more dependent on the very person destabilizing you. Yet within all this pain, there is also an opening for awareness. Recognizing the impact on the self does not mean you are broken. It means you have been caught in a system designed to erode your confidence. The very fact that you can notice the confusion, the self-doubt, and the shame is evidence that a part of you is still intact, still able to see the truth. The journey forward is not about fixing what is wrong with you, but about remembering who you were before the cycle and reclaiming trust in your own perceptions and worth. The impact of a narcissistic relationship on the self is heavy, but it is not permanent. The same way the cycle of seasons passes, so too can the fog of doubt lift. With awareness, support, and time, the self that was overshadowed can reemerge stronger, clearer, and more resilient. What was taken can be rebuilt, and what was doubted can be trusted again. Awareness is often the very first step in breaking free from the cycle of a narcissistic relationship, and it is also the most powerful. When someone is caught in the constant shifts of idealization, devaluation, and discard, it can feel as though they are trapped in a storm with no shelter. The unpredictability, the intensity, and the erosion of self-esteem can make it seem like there is no way out. But once you begin to see the pattern for what it is, not a reflection of your inadequacy, but a repetitive cycle, you begin to reclaim a sense of agency. Awareness does not immediately erase the pain, but it gives the pain context, and that context changes everything. The first way awareness empowers is by providing clarity. When you recognize that the hot and cold treatment, the shifting moods, and the conditional affection are not random, but part of a cycle, you stop taking them as a personal indictment of your worth. Without awareness, it is easy to assume, they pulled away because I wasn't good enough, or they criticized me because I failed. With awareness, those same experiences are reframed. This is the autumn of the cycle, or this is winter returning. The meaning shifts from self-blame to understanding, and that shift alone can be profoundly liberating. Awareness also interrupts gaslighting. One of the most damaging aspects of narcissistic relationships is the way your perception is constantly questioned or invalidated. You may be told that you imagined the hurt, exaggerated the conflict, or misinterpreted the rejection, Over time, this chips away at your ability to trust yourself. But once you are aware of the cycle, you start to hold on to your own reality. You learn to say to yourself, no, I did experience that, or I am allowed to feel hurt. Awareness anchors you back into your own truth, which is a powerful antidote to manipulation. Another form of power awareness brings is choice. Before you understand what is happening, it feels like you are at the mercy of the relationship's weather. Sunshine one day, storms the next. You may feel as though you have no option but to adapt. But once you see the patterns, you realize you do have choices. You may choose to set boundaries, to protect your energy, to disengage from arguments that go nowhere, or ultimately to step away from the relationship entirely. The relationship may not change, but your response to it can, and that shift is where your power resides. Awareness also helps restore self-compassion. When you are stuck in the cycle, you often blame yourself for staying, for tolerating mistreatment, or for longing for the person who hurts you. But once you understand how the cycle operates, how it is designed to hook you with highs and lows, how it thrives on instability, you begin to see your reactions not as weakness, but as a human response to a powerful dynamic. You are not flawed for hoping the spring will return. You are human. With that compassion, you can replace shame with understanding, which is far more healing. Over time, awareness becomes a lens through which you can evaluate not only this relationship, but all relationships. You begin to recognize healthy patterns versus toxic ones. You learn to value consistency over intensity, mutual respect over temporary admiration, authenticity over performance. In this way, awareness does more than help you survive a narcissistic relationship. It equips you to build healthier connections in the future. Perhaps the greatest power of awareness is that it allows you to imagine a different climate altogether. When you are caught in the cycle, it feels like this is the only weather you will ever know: sun, storm, fog, and cold, repeating endlessly. But awareness reminds you that other climates exist. There are relationships where warmth does not fade, where storms are rare and manageable, where seasons bring growth instead of destruction. The knowledge that such relationships are possible can ignite hope, and hope can give you the courage to step out of the cycle. Awareness does not erase the grief, the confusion, or the wounds, but it does transform the way you relate to them. Instead of being lost in the storm, you begin to see the storm for what it is. Instead of believing the shifting weather defines your worth, you recognize it as part of someone else's pattern. Awareness cannot change the narcissistic partner, but it can change you, and that change is what sets you free.